What's he building in there? What's he building in there? We have a right to know.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 26 of Reframing the Narrative. We are so thrilled to have Erin from Brave Tonic joining us this week on our episode. And Erin, without further ado, I'm just going to introduce you and let you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and the work that you've been up to.
Thank you. Pleased to be here. You know, we met at Confluence and we started talking about interest in doing podcast and made the connection. So I've been wanting to start a podcast for about 4 years or maybe even 5 since 2020. And ultimately, it's not important that I do a podcast, but I want to do some body of work that helps support the betterment of life for people. And with a nod to what you are talking about on this podcast, it seems like that has to do with consciousness and the way that we think about things, the stories that we tell. And that just really felt like a podcast, because in 2020 and 2021, I was like, okay, what stories are we telling right now? So I have a background in holistic health and alternative living. I was born on an organic farm. My parents in the 70s and the beginning of their life really got into healing their bodies through diet and lifestyle and a more expanded view of what it means to be a human for that time, for the 70s. And so we were practicing a macrobiotic diet. If you're not super familiar with that, it's pretty much a whole foods plant diet, but really designed and was brought to the West for healing body. And people who had cancer and other health problems were like trying macrobiotics in the way that people try different diets these days. So I grew up with this diet where I wasn't eating any sugar, I wasn't eating any dairy. I'd go to school and I couldn't join in the cupcakes, and my parents were farming 20 acres when I was about 10 years old organically. And we were selling at farmers market in New York City. And then I was 11. My dad was like, you're not going to school anymore. And I was like, really? I was not happy about that. Was like, I just wanted to be with my friends, but he was just very anti-establishment. And I didn't really understand it at that age, but he didn't want us indoctrinated with, well, he just knew like it wasn't good. And, but the local school system demanded scholastic tests every year. It was like, this was the 80s, and it's not like homeschooling is now in the United States. So we had to do tests, and we had to, the school district actually took us to court, my family to court, and we had to go back to school. And then since that time, like much of my 20s, I studied massage therapy, herbalism, nutrition. I sold nutritional supplements for 20 years. And been on my own spiritual and healing journey the last, being an adult my whole life. And so, I just wanted to put all of those things together and utilize my life experience to offer something, things that I think about that I found unique and helpful in my view of the world. What's needed.
That makes complete sense. And I'm just curious, a lot of us, and we've talked about this in multiple podcasts about unschooling and taking kids out of the indoctrination center. What was that like for you going back into it after having been removed for a period of time and maybe getting a different perspective on the world through your parents and just your lived experience? What memories do you have of that time?
I always felt different. I don't know when I became aware of this, like maybe around 9 or 10. It was around that time, like we were living in like a regular house in a small town. But my parents bought a farm around that time, and we moved to live at the farm, and we had this big loft in a warehouse. And so like around that time, I already knew like I was like different. And also with all the diet and stuff, I guess I just grew up being different than everyone else anyway, so I already was used to that. But I remember like when we had to go back to school in like half of ninth grade, and we were doing like social studies, and we were talking about something related, I don't know, some political, social, something to do. And like the kids in the class started to get into a discussion, and the teacher was like, time to go back to the outline. So I had that awareness of that when I was 14 and being like, oh, things are like getting interesting, and like we're having like thoughtful conversation, but got to go back to the outline.
Interesting. I think what you're describing is the teacher recognizing that budding young adults were using their God-given brains to think about the stories they were told and say, this doesn't make a lot of sense, and trying to rationalize it or question it. And that's certainly not what the indoctrination centers are there for, obviously. But before I comment too much further, Jake, good to see you again. We haven't let you have a word in edgewise, and for our viewers who may see a delayed signal, we may just throw a Max Headroom image over his face until the signal catches up. But good to see you as always, and let me let you ask a few questions or make some comments.
Sure. Well, thanks for the welcome. It's always fun being an avatar. I think I might take a page from the playbook of one of my favorite podcasters these days, JJ Vance, not the vice president, who, when he speaks of certain real life individuals, he likes to Muppetize them. So he'll have a picture of someone like Colonel Michael Aquino, for instance, when he's talking about certain cult activities, maybe connected to a certain bay in Northern California. And he will put a Muppet head on him while he's talking about him. So I think I'll probably have to wear some kind of a Muppet head, but not Miss Piggy, please. Anyway, in addition to welcoming Erin to our podcast, first and foremost, how do you go about navigating this world when you feel like it's just like going with that tide of the public schools and the outlines and what is expected? It's just can be aggravating. It can be disappointing, and you can get disillusioned. What motivates you to keep going and maybe starting your own podcast, and you have a website and you have an Instagram and everything? Is it just opening a mind or two, or even just making friends or allies? What are your thoughts on that kind of journey that you're
Yeah.
on?
Well, I think when I first started with the idea of doing a podcast was because like I couldn't talk to people around me during COVID 2020. And I just wanted an outlet for everything that I was going through. And I remember like even before that, I tried to offer a suggestion of a herbal throat spray to a fellow coworker. And she was like, well, there's no studies on that. I'm like, really? You wouldn't just do something to soothe your throat? It's natural. So I just like started to catch on. Like, having worked in the natural products industry, I was like, still after like all these years, how big the organic industry is, like this is still a thing. So yeah, so one was to like just express myself. And then two, to like build a community, more so. And, it's 2025 now, so I've explored different places where I have met other like-minded people. And then, this sounds cliche, but like making your own mark on the world, like wanting to contribute something and be like, hey, this is something of me. But I think also it's just like the way I see things. And I want to put it out there, like, especially like the moments that we're in now. And it just feels so important for future generations. So that motivates me a lot, actually. I'm not a parent, but I do have um, nephews and nieces, and you know, so. But yeah, I mean, it's easy to get disillusioned, like especially for me, like when I think like how big the world is now, like how many people are on the planet, and like maybe you get like a little uh, circle of like, wow, this like people are doing this, or they're waking up, or they're thinking about this and whatever, and then you're like turn around and there's like this other thing that's. How do you deal with disillusionment?
You purchase a microphone and you hang out in front of your computer and you talk about it. That's that's definitely one of the steps you can take.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I go by Discerning Jake on this podcast. So I like to operate on the principle that if you discern something to be true to you, it's a moral obligation to follow it. So that might even be kind of true about just noting the pitfalls out there or the distractions. And maybe you're not going to quit watching Netflix cold turkey, for instance. But if you understand that they're trying to manipulate you and everything, as we opened up, everything's a story, right? And you're just not buying that story and you reduce your Netflix intake, it's kind of like reducing your sugar intake or your processed food intake. And so that's, for me, my trajectory right now is just trying to minimize and simplify the authenticity of my path. And that may be as a consumer, so to speak. But it's also just speaking your mind. And like you mentioned, just being kind of flabbergasted at, I like to think of them as NPCs, just people walking around and they have a different story that they're believing and they're following. And I don't try to judge them anymore. I just try and understand where they come from and where they are at the moment. But I do find myself in situations like I was in the Mission a few days ago in San Francisco at a gathering, and I felt like there's no way I could ever be myself around these people that I was at a certain function with. But at that same time, I feel like they probably would never listen to this podcast, but I feel comfortable behind a microphone with my co-host PJ and saying, this is how we feel about things. I'm not a debater. I wouldn't want to get into a debate about anything. Like I was talking with somebody and just making small talk, and it comes out that she's an activist. Well, what are you involved in? Well, climate activism. And then it's just like, okay, that's her thing. So, yeah, that's just kind of how I operate these days, and I believe PJ's kind of along the same trajectory.
Yeah, no, I
How
agree.
about you,
It's
PJ?
wasted effort in many cases to try to force feed anyone or to try to change their mind in a full frontal attack. I think, as we've discussed in this podcast many times over, it's really just about planting a seed of doubt or some sort of kernel of truth that will germinate in their minds and ultimately hopefully lead them down a path where they can discover this themselves. But there's so many truths that I've come across that it took me a while to grapple with and really reassimilate my mind because of the indoctrination centers and what I had been told my whole life, anywhere from grade school in through college. I mean, it's a very effective system for shaping people's minds to a very well-defined set of narratives. And as an extension of what Jake was saying, I heard Paul Stobbs from Understanding Conspiracy say this in one of his recent talks to the screen sessions, where he more or less said, this world isn't for saving. You know, it's a dark and fallen world. Don't expend your energy trying to feel like you are everyone's savior, or that you, even that this world is to be saved. It's not. And for me personally, how I try to stay from going down that path of disillusionment is just to always try to get grounded again with the higher power and really have my grounding with what matters in this world, and that's your relationship with God. And I think if you start there, then everything else falls in place. But I think a lot of people get caught up in the trap of, well, we have to make things perfect in this world. I simply don't think that's possible. And I think that people at their core, we're all fallen. We all are corruptible. Jake and I talked about that when we did our Heroes or Zeros episode. We even joked that even Jake has a price, although he didn't put that exact number out there. But we're all human at the end of the day, and this place is definitely not something that can be fixed. So it's really about your connection to your higher power. It's about living in a way that is consistent with your values, and that you make the best choices you can as every day goes by, that you're making good choices about your health choices, the food you're eating, the water you're drinking, all of that makes a difference. And there's a lot of traps out there for people to hurt or destroy themselves, and they're too numerous to count. But that's where as Jake was talking about, discernment really comes in to know, is this really good for me? Is this the right path, or is this where I need to be spending my energy? And obviously that's a lot of what we talk about in this podcast. And I'd be really curious, Erin, if you had to boil down the message that you're working to develop to bring to the world through your podcast, and you've already got an online presence, but if you had to boil it down to a few key elements, what would those be? What are you really trying to get out to the public, whether that's people in our small community here on the internet, or whether that's the broader subsection of the world? What is it that's important for you to communicate out?
Well, I mean, in a way, it's good that I waited because I have developed like more of a concept in the past few years. And what it came down for me was like, are we choosing to preserve life or not? So to me, that's a very clear choice that someone can make. So that pertains to how we live on the land, how we live in community, how we treat our bodies, how we treat each other, our relationships, our culture. And I mean, I'm not immune, from participating and consuming, but that to me feels like preserving, like I have on my website, like dedicated to the reverence of life. And for me, it is spiritual also, because like we're given this place and this life, and for future generations, like, I mean, to be honest, I don't know where I stand on the climate narrative. Like, I don't think it's like one isolated issue, but having grown up on a organic farm and knowing about what's been happening with glyphosate over the last 30 years, like our soil, and we're being poisoned. So like there still is a deep ecological, and we're just consuming to this crazy point, like, and we're not doing the opposite. So to me, like this reverence for like what is going to fulfill future generations is the motivation for support. Yeah. So, yeah. And I mean, it seems like it's a way of life for me too. Like, I think I would live that way anyways, like irregardless of whether like I put it out into the world for other people.
That's really one of the principles that I think we should all strive to live by, is that the measure of your character is what you do when no one's listening, no one's watching, right? So whether or not you have a website, an Instagram, a podcast, you should be true to yourself and your ideals, and feed your spirit with things that are authentic and genuine, and provide sustenance for that. And like PJ was saying, maybe grow your relationship with our creator, and learn something or another about, like you were saying, Erin, reverence for life and our purpose here. So I really enjoy that remark that you just made.
Yeah, I mean, it came in the last few years because like since about 2018, I got like more spiritual. Like I wasn't raised with any particular spirituality other than macrobiotics, which was quite actually intense or comprehensive. It was almost spiritual. And it is, because there's parts of it that have to do with the yin and yang and the order of the cosmos and stuff, which is, I don't really feel qualified to explain, but yeah, so since like the last 7 years or so, like I found exploring aspects of what I believe about or feel about spirituality to be meaningful in a general sense. And for me, it's like more like a universe or source of life, and like this design that is here, the symmetry that is here in what the human has created, and the animals and the plants, and how it's all kind of designed to like work together, and like our capacity for like healing, and it's miraculous, right? So I was like, oh, like this source of life, and what's happening in like the soil, in terms of the capacity for the soil to regenerate given the right nutrients and the right structure. I was like, oh, it's the same. Like it's all down to like, so whether you say source or universe or God or whatever, this life, this urge for life is what this place is made of. So for me, part of my work is bringing that forward. And, so you don't have to be spiritual, you don't have to believe whatever, but that is the truth of this place.
It's quite undeniable, no matter what your particular perspective is. It was actually a week or two ago, we talked to Michael from Confluence, and we talked about some of the aspects of our potential geocentric existence, and that's a whole nother level of looking at how everything works in sync around us. But even going to the more obvious things like the Fibonacci sequence, and how that repeats so many places in nature. And you look in fruit, or you look in trees or vegetables, and there's just these repeating patterns, and it's just staring you in the face that there's obvious signs of creation. And you just really have to put your head in the sand or turn the volume up on your government indoctrination to think otherwise, but it's all there in front of you. And especially someone like you who's spent so much time in a farm, in nature, thinking about how all these things play together, it has to be just as plain as day for you too. And I can see why you'd want to bring that message to the world. One thing I do have a question about, though, and it's something that we've touched on a little bit in this podcast, and certainly it's been a discussion online in various forms, but where do you draw the line, if at all, with the balance between things that can nourish you or give you additional health benefits versus something that is lab made and synthetic? One example I'll give is some people will take vitamin D for whatever reason, but at the core of that vitamin D, if you look on the back of the label, it says as cholecalciferol, which is actually rat poison. And you can look into a lot of these ingredients and realize that even if they were truly isolated as claimed, that doesn't mean that they work the way they do in nature with everything that surrounds them. So where is that line for you in your healing set of products or things that you promote? Where do you draw that distinction between the lab and the real world?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I sold nutritional supplements for over 15 years. I worked in a herb store, almost like a apothecary store in Santa Cruz, California during the 90s. It was a great time. It was a great store, and people could come in there and just, they could talk to acupuncturists, they could talk to people and be like, hey, I've got this, what should I do? And we would just share advice and share suggestions. And I worked alongside trained acupuncturists and herbalists and learned from them. And then I went on to do product demos for a number of companies for about 5 years or so, and then throw in a few other jobs in there. Mostly, I did not do vitamins per se. in my product demos, I was more focused on like whole food, whole plant, like natural source products. But there was some overlap there. Like I did do fish oil demos for about 5 years. So I tend to like lean towards like a plant or a whole food source something if I'm going to take a supplement. However, the last few years, I've kind of started to get more in this mindset of like, part of it is minimalism. Part of it is believing more and more that we're designed to heal and be in balance. And that I don't need something outside myself to do what my body is going to do. But I've lived this life about nutrition, so I'm very like careful and pay a lot of attention to how I eat. So, but like my parents were looking to get something done. I don't remember to get certain kind of dental work, they would want your vitamin D levels to be a certain high rate. So if I was ever in a situation like that, like I wouldn't be afraid. Like I would probably take the vitamin D or something like that. But I've never taken. I've taken pharmaceuticals like a handful of times, like ibuprofen a few times. That's it. I was given antibiotics once, and I didn't I took it like a couple days, and I was like, I don't think I need this. And that's it. And I've never been vaccinated, so yeah, pharma free. Never.
Your parents raised you right. I wish I could say the same, and that's not a knock on my parents, but there just wasn't the awareness for a lot of people. And even into my early adult life, I volunteered for poisoning injections, and you live and you learn, right? And I think that's part of the important point of what you're trying to get across is better ways to take care of yourself, and even something that I intend to explore further based on a chat that Jake and I are both in, and some good advice has been given, even how we feed our pets. And that's something that crushes my soul every time I see our pets eating, majorly processed food. And we get into this trap where we think that that's the only thing that we can give them. But, I'm sure there's other alternatives out there. And just like you're trying to do, raise awareness. If we all knew of better ways to maintain our body, and I really liked what you said, that our bodies are meant to heal themselves. They don't need pharma intervention. They don't need chemicals. I do think that if we give ourselves the right rest and the right general maintenance, that we can kick most things that come our way. Jake, do you have any additional thoughts there?
Yeah, just building on the body really knows all the answers and is self-healing. I think back to a book that had a huge impact on me at one point in my life. At that particular time, I was a vegetarian, but I was kind of an idiot as far as the way I went about it. I just didn't eat meat. I just ate anything but meat. And so that involved processed foods like fake ham, simulated ham, and things like that. That gave me the worst indigestion of my life. But I got into the work of Anne Wigmore, who was an early pioneer. She's probably macrobiotic adjacent, but I believe she's credited with discovering the healing powers of wheatgrass, because she, as a starving, kind of like someone running around during a very bad period in her native Lithuania, observed her grandmother gathering herbs and grasses. And then when she later had cancer and her hair was falling out, she observed she got a bunch of grasses and grew them and gave them to, speaking of pets, gave them to her cats to sniff out. And the only one that they would eat was the wheatgrass. And she's like, okay, that's the one I'm going to use. And so she ended up curing her cancer and lived until she died in a fire at about the age of 90 or so. And she'd probably still be going. She'd probably be like 115, 120 by now. The title of her book was called Be Your Own Doctor. And it was really all about the underlying lesson was the body really knows what it needs, and we need to get out of its way and allow it to heal. And one of the ways that we can do that is literally to say, okay, I don't feel well. Instead of what can I take, maybe it's how can I step away and not interfere, and I can fast and I can be quiet and still. So I wanted to ask Erin if you ever incorporate fasting, therapeutic fasting at all, or anything related to that.
Definitely. Yeah. I intermittent fast every day. So I don't usually eat until like between 12 and 2 in the afternoon. Sometimes I'll even go till 4 or 5 o'clock. And then I didn't get into it until about 6 years ago. But for a while, I was like doing 3-day fasts like a few times a year. And I definitely would like to still be doing that. I just need to like work it into my schedule. So yeah, I really, the benefits of fasting are just, it's free and it's totally doable. If someone's like pre-diabetic or diabetic, then maybe they would need some support, but otherwise, yeah, it's amazing.
It really is. And it's so funny because I think things like, oh, maybe I should do a fast always come to my mind like right before a major holiday or something. Like we're coming up on July 4th in the United States, right? And I'm thinking now would be a really good time for a fast. And meanwhile, I'm invited to a massive barbecue on Friday.
Totally.
But I've fasted up to 2 weeks is my record, and that was actually I did a bunch of like carrot juice, kind of juice fasts, some broth fasts, but the most successful one was actually a 14 or 15-day water fast that I did. And it's interesting because it's a different experience every time. It's kind of like a river, and you go in the river, and it's still the same river, but every single piece of water flowing through it is different at all times, and all the flotsam and jetsam
14.
that come through, they're different. It's flowing, right? And so you might do the same fast, the 14, 15-day fast, or even a 3 to 5 day fast, or you set out aiming to do a 3-day fast, and you might end up doing a 15-day fast, or you might set out wanting to do a 7 to 10-day fast, and day 2 you're just like, nope, it's not for me this time. So the lesson I have taken away from that is really to just listen to what your body's telling you, and it's almost like a meditative exercise in that sense. You learn to really be more in touch with what your body's telling you. So I like what you said though about I would be inclined to just be like, yeah, absolutely, no provisos, no buts. Fasting is great, but I like that you also mentioned that some people might need some support, some guidance, like pre-diabetic people. Just like any particular diet, I think fasting is not necessarily for everyone. And I do notice that I think there's even a book called Fast Like a Girl by somebody, a really popular author, Mindy somebody these days is really popular. And I do notice differences. Maybe it's the hormones or the fat proportion of the body makeup or balance of fat to lean muscle in women versus men. But women respond to hunger differently and also fasting differently. So I guess that would logically lead to an answer. Have you discovered any related insights?
Well, I've never done anything longer than 3 days. And so 14 days, that's impressive. Yeah, 14 days was just water. So did you work during that?
Yeah. In fact, I was a competitive triathlete at the time. And yeah, and so I mostly took the time off, but people will relate that you can feel kind of like after the first 3 days, which are really hard because your body's just flooded with toxins and you feel like, oh, this has got to be bad for me. But once you make it through the other side and you're cleaning your system out, you start to feel superhuman sometimes. And you can alternate between superhuman and just
Out
like,
of it.
uh-oh, I feel like I'm already 6 feet under right now. And in the middle of one of my fasts, I think it might have even been that longest fast, my friend was in town and we were training partners. He was living in another town. He's like, you want to go for a run? I'm like, yeah, man, I'm kicking butt. And I felt like I was flying, but my watch told me something completely different. But I did kind of jog throughout that period because 14 days completely off when you're a competitive athlete it's something that's mentally, I think, is really impossible to do for most people. Physically is probably the right course, just going out there and going for a walk and getting some sunshine. But,
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really, I
was
haven't
active.
followed the rabbit hole of protocols for women versus men in terms of like fasting and like cold plunges. Like somebody, like they're starting to go around, and someone like sent me like a video about like cold plunging for women, and like I didn't watch it because I've already done like some ice baths, so I already have the experience of what it was like for me. And I'm not doing them every day. Like I do them pretty rarely. Like I would probably go in cold water regularly if I had a setup, or more often. But yeah, so I already know like what it's about, and so to me, it just felt like another kind of like story that people are telling, for me. And I'm sure like there's women like historically who like live in villages in northern climates that just go jump in the lake, and when you get too cold, you get out. And also just like we're talking about like being your own self-referential, right? Like, so this is like another part of like, we're in alignment on that of like listening to your body. And this is what we're not doing. Like we're outsourcing our healthcare to providers. And this is what they tell us, right? Like, check with your provider. It's like, why don't you check with yourself?
Yeah, that's part of, I think it's an upcoming episode, maybe even next week, but PJ and I are planning something on the power of words and the basically word magic that we find ourselves getting so sucked into and playing along with and aiding and abetting the purveyance of terms like that. Provider, consumer. So provider's like your dealer, and then they're providing the health to you. It's not you. It's not your God-given ability and your innate powers of following your intuition and discernment and your eyes being open to things. No,
Or
check
what
with
you
your provider.
feel. So I think that we have, and actually have an essay on Substack that I'm publishing soon about this whole topic. But we're not taught to feel and like listen to our bodies, as culturally. And as children, we go along with what, we kind of have to do the tug and war, right? As kids, like, no, I want to do this. But we also have to like conform and do what the parents say or do what the teacher says or whatever. So we're not taught often to like, what is my body telling me right now?
And often we can be gaslighted to believe that some signal our body is giving us is wrong, and that it's really just a sign that we need more pharmaceuticals or more chemicals or, some sort of smoke and mirrors. And I'm sure that you found in everything that you've been doing and given your background and how you're raised, really having to shut out the distractions and the noise and really being able to focus in and hear your body talking to you. I think that's probably more of an art than a science. I don't know that what would work for you would work for me or work for Jake. And I think that that's very individual, but I think we are flooded with a lot of signal and language as the two of you were talking about. that can lead you astray from hearing that voice telling you whether you really do need to eat or if you're thirsty or whatever the case may be. So it's really something that we all probably need to do a better job of listening versus force feeding, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, actually. And I think it has to do with self-trust. And if you've had trauma in your life or grown up in a dysfunctional environment, like you're not necessarily going to know like how to trust yourself, or if you just like haven't been around it. I mean, if you were like your whole life, you're just like thought one way, like, oh yeah, I get the answers from other people or whatever, like, but I don't know that if this is part of what I've been stealing for, future content. Like, I think well-being has to do with self-trust, and it has to be with also like self-love, because that's where you like connect to the creator and connect to this vibrant life, because you know that you're worthy of receiving that. We're going through a lot of upheaval, things are not what they were, especially these days. There's a lot of upheaval. A lot of things are coming to light, and a lot of things to sort out depending who you are or where you are. I mean, I don't know, maybe. Do you think it's always been this way? Or it's different now?
Well, that's quite a question you pose about whether it's always been this way, because that could open a whole another hour of discussion about the ages of humanity and the doctoring of history. But it certainly does feel like things have accelerated in our lifetimes, no matter what generation you're in. I guess it's probably not true that there is a younger generation who didn't experience 9/11, but it feels like everything that happened from 9/11 has just been building, and it accelerates every year. And obviously we saw the chicanery of 2020 and everything that happened around that. And I have my own theories, I would say, at this point of what that's building up to. But that being said, I think that hundreds or thousands of years ago was probably a lot different. And I feel like people probably were a lot closer in their diet and their lifestyle to nature and what was intended than what we live today. And I'd actually be curious to know, I know you spend a lot of time in Mexico, and I'm not sure if it's in a major metropolitan area or if it's more rural, but I wonder if it is more rural, if that's closer to what we imagine living in nature would be like versus going down the street to the gas station and getting some fast food that is 99% poison. What's your experience been there and spending time in Mexico?
Well, I spent a majority of the time has been in Baja California Sur, in Los Cabos, which is a pretty touristed area. It's like some people even call it San Diego. Well, one person called it San Diego South. So it's not part of the mainland, so it's not typical per se. But I do would say there's more of a tendency for Mexican families to cook at home and eat at home and make a big meal for everybody than to go out. Although there are more and more restaurants being built here because there's a lot of development happening. Um, and do people seem to know about like herbal teas or whatever, like it was like their grandparents, their abuelos like taught them, to use natural medicine. But you walk into a grocery store and like the aisles of soybean oil and canola oil are quite massive. So people aren't really getting the education about that. More and more, it is happening, but Mexico is different from the United States in that like they're not consuming like media all the time, like in the United States. So, um, they did follow like the government and whoever like in 2020, but it was different in a way because they weren't getting the onslaught of news every single day like in the US. So I would say it's both. Although a friend told me we were talking about something, she's born in Mexico, that like her grandmother taught her about like herbal teas for a cold or something like that. But like, I think she was like, well, that's the last generation that had that knowledge. And is it being passed down? Maybe not.
Almost on a spiritual level, or a knowledge level, that's true. And then you mentioned like the soil being so, whether denatured or poisoned with things like glyphosate. It's almost like there's a race to just make everything impure, whether it's consciousness or the physical side of things. And I think that just underscores the importance of trying to stay true, because if you're familiar with the way water can structure itself, like even slightly polluted water that's come through plastic pipes and municipal systems can restructure, and then it remains structured. So there's something to say for just that coherence and that potential. So we can't give up and give into it. And but getting back to your background, I just remember macrobiotics being really big in the 80s in particular, like late 70s and through the 80s. And where is macrobiotics these days in your life, just in terms of what you
Yeah.
take away personally from
Yeah.
having that background and your take on that, and then maybe an improved version of that,
Sure.
or where you are with that now?
Well, when I moved out on my own, I definitely was like more of like, became really clear, like, not to be so serious about it, because when I was a little kid, my parents were pretty serious. And they were very strict when I was young. And that's kind of what they were taught in the 70s when they were studying with different teachers, whatever. And they've moved away from that strictness themselves, but they still follow very much the principles of eating whole food. They're mostly plant-based. I'm mostly plant-based. And see, what do I already stand on that now? I mean, pretty much that is just my foundation to eat whole foods. And it's like how I grew up, so it's very compatible with me. And, I think about that sometimes too, like, especially with like the like dairy and animal food conversation. For me, like, I'm fine eating like I eat eggs sometimes, I eat some chicken, I eat some fish, like it works for me. But I've also been doing that like my whole life. I've never eaten red meat. And so sometimes people who have a vegan diet, they fail at it or they develop poor health. But I'm not vegan. So, but yeah, so I just wonder sometimes, well, like, if I'm more successful at eating more of a plant-based diet just because it's like what I'm used to. I've been doing it my whole life. But then I also think that we're quite flexible. That's my opinion. And that like stress is like maybe a bigger component than like getting caught up in like, am I eating red meat? Am I eating raw milk? Am I eating beans or whole grains or whatever? That's just kind of my take. Yeah.
I think you bring up a really good point there about everyone's biome is different, and especially if you've been conditioned to eat a certain way. And Jake, I think you could probably tell the story of what it was like for you going to your carnivore diet. I'm sure there was some level of adjustment, and I would imagine if you went back to eating as you did before, that would be another pretty harsh adjustment. I don't know that we've talked about that on this podcast, but it would probably be interesting for our viewers to hear that journey from your side.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and I'm happy to share a little bit. So I have come from as I mentioned, a very, I would say, shoddy, unprincipled vegetarian background for over 20 years. But then I was trying to compete as a triathlete, and just noticing that I didn't have the lean muscle mass that I was looking to get, that power to weight ratio. And I reincorporated meat into my diet. And I think it just pushed out the starch a little bit because I was just a starchitarian when it came down to it. So that was very successful and I had some really good results. And then I actually was a fruitarian for almost a year and had great results on that. And then more recently, in the last year and 2 months or so, I've been following an animal-based diet with some modifications of late. And I think you hit the word right there, PJ. It's the biome. When we make any kind of a change, and everyone knows about Montezuma's revenge. When you go to a different area, like you're an American, you go to Mexico, you might end up sitting on the porcelain god for a little while. And it's not because the food in Mexico is spoiled or impure or substandard. It's because it's got a different set of microorganisms that come with it, and they don't get along with our microorganisms, and our microorganisms want to they're flushed out of the system, and that's what that whole Montezuma's revenge is all about, right? So I think getting down to the crux of any diet really is, it's kind of like, he's not my guru or anything, but Michael Pollan's aphorism, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That works. You could say eat food, not too much, mostly animals, if it's whole foods. And that's really the takeaway after experimenting for so long, for 40 years with my diet, and the modifications that I'm coming to with the carnivore approach. I hesitate to use that term so much anymore because it's animal-based with some fruit, because fruit, there's no way God put fruit on this planet and for us to just look at and go, isn't that a pretty color? And I respond well to it. So I think the takeaway really is, if it comes from nature, it's probably not going to hurt you unless it's like a poison pufferfish or something like that.
Yeah, and before I make a comment, potentially a closing comment here, I'm just going to preemptively slap you on the wrist for using the wrong word choice just a second ago, Jake. And for our viewers, we had the episode with Michael, they'll understand why I'm giving him the wag of the finger for using the word planet, but I'll just leave it at that. But moving forward in the conversation back to what the two of you were talking about in Biomes, it makes me think a little bit, and this is maybe a rabbit hole I don't want to open too deeply given where we're at in this session, but thinking about biomes and how that relates to parasites in us. And there's a lot of talk online, especially in the alternative health community, that you need to get rid of these parasites. And I think that Medicine Girl and some of her recent Substacks has made a strong point that those could actually be working in symbiosis with you to eat all the garbage that gets brought into your body. And when you go through these great lengths to get rid of them, you may actually be lowering your defenses to these toxins that enter your body. And perhaps the real balance is the right biomes with the right set of parasites eating your garbage. And I think, again, this is an example of where your body can heal itself naturally, and you don't necessarily need to bombard it with heavy metals, no matter how they're dressed up and what sort of vial they're put in. I mean, there's so many ways that people are talking about of getting rid of them, but is that really in our best interest? And I think at the end of the day, we can heal ourselves by just paying close attention to what we're putting into our body more than introducing something foreign from outside of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the parasite conversation can be like, well, am I ignoring the fact that I probably have parasites? Or like you said, like, unless you have a reason to, like, why would you want to go to such extremes to detox, your body? And so I like, as we were speaking before, is the fasting, because through regular fast, like, yeah, if you do have something unwanted living in your gut, most likely it's going to start to come into balance if you're fasting on a regular basis. And, since you fast, you probably have heard the term of autophagy. And so that's when the body starts to go into
Yep.
healing mode, start going to clean up the garbage. And so whether, you had alcohol, or whether you've been eating too rich foods, or you have parasites, or you have the gut lining is affected from glyphosate, like it's going to start to do that work. And like, we don't have to like obsess about whether we have parasites or not, but for sure, if someone has like terrible digestive issues, like maybe it'd be worth considering. I also like to make sure I eat plenty of sea salt in my diet. I like to stay more on the alkaline side of things, just certain like regular hygiene, so that I wouldn't have less likely to have that issue. And I have gotten sick traveling. Like a few times when I ate fish in different countries, I got sick. And yeah, I think once I had like a ceviche off a salad bar at a grocery store. That was, yeah. But I am like, I haven't necessarily gotten like the Montezuma's revenge, because like I have a strong immune system. I have a strong digestive system, because I've never burdened it with things that were not right for I mean, not never, but for the most part, most of my life, I've tried to maintain that. And I should also mention my parents have a fermented food business. So I've been staying with them a lot over the last few years, and there's always like sauerkraut and kimchi to eat. And I just actually taught like a kimchi class for my friends. So I try to get those
Nice.
kind of foods into my
I
diet.
view kimchi. I view kimchi as the vegetable cousin of bacon, because there's no such thing as something that doesn't go well with kimchi and that you can have too much of. Bacon and kimchi are somehow kindredly related because they make everything better.
One of the things that we did as a group during Luminary Village, during the malarkey, as we were a whole bunch of like refugees from insanity, was somebody gave a kimchi workshop, kimchi making workshop at the park, on the park benches that we later got shooed away from because we weren't masking outdoors. But I haven't continued with that practice, unfortunately. I
Awesome.
do make sauerkraut
Yeah.
though.
Yeah.
Yeah. PJ, you ever make sauerkraut or
I don't
kimchi?
believe so. I've had some cooking classes in the past, but I don't think that that was part of it. But being cognizant of the time, Erin, I think this might be a good time for you to tell the viewers where to find you and the work that you've been doing, and maybe give a promo to the podcast and the Substack that you've been working diligently behind the scenes on.
Sure. Yeah. And thanks so much for this conversation, and get my wheels going here. So you can find more about me on my website, which is bravetonic.com. And I have been creating content also on Instagram at Brave Tonic. And I have a Substack, which I'm just starting to create for, which is bravetonic.substack.com. And my podcast, when it launches, will be called Tonic for Humanity Podcast. So, yeah, that's the plan.
Well, Jake and I will be your first subscribers, and thank you again for making the time to meet with us today. It's been great, and hopefully our listeners have gotten something interesting out of this conversation, and we'll also go follow you and your work as you develop it. Jake, any other parting thoughts from your side?
Just to add, I just love that we're not sitting here with our guests telling anybody what the remedy is. we're just asking questions and sharing what we observe and what has been working for us and the people that we know. And so I look forward to Erin sharing more of what may work and just like being true to that direction. So Substack is the place, obviously, right?
Yeah, or
That's a
even
great
like it's
place for
okay
it.
to like ask questions, right? Or it's okay to talk about it. I think that's
Yeah.
really important. Getting back to some of the things mentioned is like, because we do have so much things coming to light and so much opposition, the more conversations we have, the better.
We appreciate you coming on with us today. And it all started in person at Confluence. So that shows the power of, speaking of Substack, our most recent post. We're not super active, but hope to be a little more active. And we were talking about just the remedy to the circus that is politics. It could just be getting together even over some bread and circuses and
Yep.
talking about things
Awesome.
that matter.
Yep. Well, thank you so much. And we'll stay in touch. I look forward to seeing what else you're producing as well.
Absolutely. And you can count on seeing Jake and I at the next major confluence, although a little birdie told me there might be a small one later this year. But next year, next May, we'll both be there in force and looking forward to seeing you and some of our other friends from that event. So hopefully we hear from you before then, but definitely look forward to seeing you in person and giving you a big hug.
All right, great. Thank you.
You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage. You just have to raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, plant enough conspiracy theorizing that citizens no longer know what to believe.